Welcome back to What's New with Mead. We are here with Daniel from Moonjoy Meadery today out in North Carolina, and we're going to chat about his meadery and everything he has going on there. Daniel, super glad you're here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, man.
We already started off with miscommunication in time zones. I already, my brain, I got to remember that when I schedule these things, but I'm glad we can make it. So go ahead and tell us about your meadery.
Okay. My name is Daniel Phillips. I started Moonjoy Meadery with my mother-in-law, Margaret Moose, and she's been a home brewer for a little over a decade now, probably like 12 years now, actually. But she wanted to start a meadery, but she's a small little old lady and she can't lift things. So I came in there because I'm 6'9", and I can lift all the heavy lifting for her. As you know, honey gets really heavy. So we started this together in late 2018 and had our grand opening October 2020. And so we've been open since Halloween of 2020, and it's been awesome. This past week in particular, we've hit quite a few sales records, and we're doing festivals and distributing, and now we're shipping online, and it's just really grown quite quickly.
Yeah,
taking off.
That's super cool. That's it's very unique. Your story is super unique because I feel like not a lot of son-in-laws brew with their mother-in-law. That's a pretty cool thing.
She's a pretty awesome lady. She's an author, a tattoo artist, a painter, all kinds of cool stuff. She's really unique, interesting person, and I was just glad to be able to pick up a few things from her.
Yeah.
A lot of our best sellers, like the Dark Horse that you're drinking, is her creation. I'm drinking one of mine right now. It's called Litha. It's a black cherry and lavender. And that one, it's just honey, spring water, a little organic black cherry juice. And I use lavender flowers in that. A little bit goes a long way with lavender, definitely.
Well, that's good to know because I'm about to do a project for another YouTube series, and one of the ingredients is lavender. So, and I have never really brewed with it, so I'll keep that in mind.
Well, I would steep it in another dish, like a Pyrex dish or something like that, steep it in water. I usually go about 20 minutes. You can go a little longer if you want a stronger infusion, but then I pour that through, a simple strainer into the brew. The batches where we added whole lavender flowers too was just a little bit too potent. So kind of you can steep and adjust and add it in as in the primary and not have to like worry about overpowering.
Yeah. Well, so this one, it's going to be interesting. It's it's vanilla and lavender and rose. So it's going to be interesting. But no, so when you're steeping the lavender, are you doing it at a specific temperature? What have you found?
We have a little electric kettle, and we just boil water in that and then pour it into a Pyrex dish with the whole ingredients, like lavender flowers, or we do, tea steeping for tannin infusion. If you want, actually, I can walk through the meadery and the back and show you some stuff.
That'd be great. I think people would love to see that. That's something new. We can plan on doing that in a few minutes if you'd like, and if you want to do that. Definitely
less is more, and you can always add more in the secondary is what I always go for, especially with new recipes, unless I'm just feeling super confident that this is going to work, which I've rolled the dice a few times and it's come out pretty well so far.
Yeah.
But it's always a gamble.
So you were gracious enough to send me a mead, and like you just said, it's one of your best sellers. It's the Dark Horse. And one thing that's fascinating about this one was I was looking at the bottle and looking at all the ingredients. You have honey, of course, prunes, dates, lime, and orange. And I was going to ask you about, I know you said it's your mother-in-law's recipe. So I wanted to ask you about a little bit about the balancing side of it. Obviously, prunes and dates are more medium They're not very bright. You know, sometimes they can be bright, but they're probably more medium. Are your go ahead, sorry.
No, prunes and dates I consider like a brown or a dark fruit. Sometimes I think of flavors and colors, and when you're pairing stuff together, you know, are they going to go well? Are they the same category, color kind of deal? It's just kind of how my brain works, I guess. The dates and prunes, and there's prune juice in there too. So we whole dates, organic dates, and prunes get thrown in there whole, just halved. And then we add prune juice, a little bit of orange juice, a tiny bit of lime juice, and then we add the spices in the primary too. Everything just goes in the front. And it's fermented. It usually sits in primary for about a month before I get around to giving it its first rack. But it's really good. The dark horse you're drinking right now was bottled February 15th.
Okay.
And it was probably made 2 months before that. So it's still really young, but it's very drinkable. She did a really good job of creating a sweet mead, you know, a dessert mead, but all those spices really bring in a balance for the sweetness and make it very drinkable.
One thing I was going to say about the lime and kind of acid balance there is you've done a good job of designing this one to be balanced between like it is sweet, like I said, desserty, but it's not cloying. And I think a lot of times I've had a lot of meads from especially homebrew mead makers who lean so far into the sweetness because to be honest, you can hide behind sweetness pretty easily, but having something that is sweet, but not literally just a spoonful of honey, which I know some people like, but is hard.
It definitely is. Balance is one of my main things. You know, drinkability, I guess, is what we went for in the beginning. Can you sit here and drink a bottle of it, enjoy it, want more afterwards? You know, or are you feeling full or like, that was a little too sweet for me. Maybe I want something drier. So we have 13 different meads out right now in the tasting room. I only make a few dries. There is a market for them, but in my area, people prefer sweeter things. So I really shoot for semi-sweets most of the time. And that for me is that nice little balance of where you get plenty of sweetness that, you know, makes your tongue happy and excites the brain. But there's plenty of balance offsetting there with the dryness or alcohol percentage. We have a sweet mead. It's a sweet muscadine that's 18.2%. Natural fermentation. You know, I just pitched a whole bunch of that one. I think I used K1B yeast on. I really like that one for drier meats, stuff like that. It just ended up, I used so much honey in that recipe. I think I did like 360 pounds of honey in 80 gallons. So it was like 6 buckets of honey, 6 5-gallon buckets. And so there was so much sugar left over. It went all the way to 18% and still stayed a sweet mead. So
do you do much oaking in your world, or are you guys doing that much?
Oak chips. When I get some more free time, I'd like to do like some tastings at distilleries, local distilleries. I'm thinking about taking one of our popular blackberry meads and doing some like bourbon barrel aging from a local distillery, and that way we can complement each other and come out with a new twist on an old product. I don't do a lot of oak though.
So is the dark horse oaked itself?
No.
Okay. See, that was my only one, and maybe it's just my brain was seeking that out. But I feel like if you were to oak this thing in just even a light toast, I feel like that would add in just a little more roundness. It's really good, and I would love to I don't know that I'll ever get out to North Carolina. I've heard great things, but it's just there's a lot of places that I want to go to, and I'm adding more to the list every day. But it sounds like you guys have quite the repertoire already going along. And before we started the recording, you talked about how things were really moving for you guys. So
Yeah.
My when you mentioned starting in October of 2020, made me think backwards further. So you were planning and really moving like right at the beginning of the pandemic. What was that kind of like for you guys?
Yeah, so we rented this space in, we were trying for a year in another town that we lived in before we moved here, and the county and the town weren't really playing ball with us, so we moved. If someone says no, someone else is going to say yes, just somewhere else. And so you kind of have to open to being flexible. So we went 45 minutes away from where we were currently living, found a perfect space. The town was super supportive, not just the administration, but the people in the town were really excited about it. And so we came here, it's the right spot for us in Lenore. And so we rented the downstairs space of the building in November 2019, and then applied for all our permits. And while that happened, COVID kicked off and the quarantine happened and all that. And we're just sitting around waiting for permits. We couldn't even brew yet. So we finally got our permits. It took 7 months just to get our winery permits. And once we got those, we could start brewing. And I started brewing as much as I could afford to buy and do. And we started brewing all in carboys. So we're probably one of the very few people that have ever started a meadery just in carboys, 5 and 6 gallon carboys. And we had like 30 of them we collected over that 2-year period from, estate sales and homebrew stores and that kind of stuff. So then I think it was about May that I was allowed to brew, and I just started brewing as much as we could. And then in October, we opened with, I think, 5 flavors tops, maybe. And most of those, I don't think we even made a traditional mead till like way later on. I always thought traditional meads were kind of boring because I hadn't drank a lot when we first started brewing. And I just really went for melomels, and because we have all these farms surrounding us. There's all this fresh local fruit available every year. So I went crazy with the melomels, and then got into the traditionals when some people were asking me for them. So I started brewing those too. And they turned out really nice because honey is so unique. Like our dry traditional is made with just sourwood honey and spring water and yeast. And then we have a semi-sweet traditional where I do a 50-50 blend of sourwood honey and poplar honey, which are complete opposites. One's really tart and light and gold, like gold, sourwood honey is, and then poplar honey is so dark, so rich. It's a completely different flavor, but melded together, that's another one of our top 3 selling meads, definitely. It's a great little recipe, and it's just 2 honeys and spring water and yeast.
I have used sourwood 1 or 2 times, and it's really fun honey to use. I've had only have a couple little bottles of it, so I've been really sparing on how I use it. But you mentioned that melomels are kind of where people go to first, and I think people do enjoy traditionals. I think the problem is most people who are, let's say, your average mead trier, their introduction to mead, if you go off, at least based off what my experience, if you go off giving them a traditional first, sometimes they're kind of iffy about it. But if you give them like a melomel, then they're like, oh, okay. And they can start to appreciate the traditional more once they understand. It's like reversed. To me, you'd think you'd start with the traditional and be like, oh, now you're going to appreciate honey. It's like, no, they're going to appreciate honey once they like know what mead is. And then, oh, that's what I'm getting too. It's kind of a funky thing.
Absolutely. I've really noticed that. I'd say about like 95% of our customers are brand new to mead, have no idea what it is, or they've tried one before and they've always complained about it being overly sweet. It's too sickly sweet, not enough balance, not enough tannin. So what people do who are new to me, they'll start with flavors they already know and like. Like, oh, I like strawberries already, so I'm gonna try strawberry mead or the blackberry mead or something they're familiar with and comfortable with, and then we can start getting into traditional flavors and experimental stuff. And hey, this has like my mother-in-law made this one mead that had 13 different ingredients in it. I can't remember all of them, but it was our take or on absinthe, and so it had
Oh,
fennel, wormwood, and a whole bunch of other craziness going on in there. And it was a sizer on top of that, and it was the most bitter, awful thing you've ever drank. And some people really dug it. They like that, like hard bitter. That thankfully, it all sold, but I never made it again.
yeah. Yeah, there's every time you make something, someone will drink it, whether or not you like it. That seems to be the trend I've seen. You say you're using so many different ingredients. One of my I'm looking at a 40,000 subscriber special of some sort, and somebody mentioned me using 40 ingredients in a mead, and I was like, so maybe I need to talk to you guys about the plotting this, because it sounds like you guys are getting up there in the ingredient numbers at least.
There's probably some recipes that have like, if you're including the honey and the spring water and the there's probably like 15, 16 ingredients on maybe some recipes. Definitely like that Love Spell number 19 I mentioned that has it's a spice sizer. It has 8 different spices in it, like mace and coriander and clove and cinnamon, allspice, and all that stuff is in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it all blends together into like this one spice. It's hard to pick out maybe one spice from the other. They all just blend into this unique concoction. It's very nice. But I usually go for simpler stuff. I just made a strawberry mead. It's on day 7 right now of fermentation, and it's fresh pressed strawberry juice from a local farm. Came to me fresh, and we made a mead with it immediately as soon as it came through the door. And then I added Earl Grey tea, lime, and I'm gonna try and find some organic mint laying around here somewhere. And the secondary, I like to do like vanilla bean, oak, and certain strong flavors in the secondary. That way I can rack when the time's up or the flavor's achieved.
So, you're mentioning spices. As you do more, I feel like if you want to get in the realm of using spices and lots of ingredients, you have to have a pretty deep understanding of how to balance those things. Because there are some spices that, taking back to what we started with, lavender. Lavender, I can't say this for sure, but as you said, takes over. And so if you don't know that and you start to just throw things in, and you have 8 different ingredients, you might end up with too much stuff. And so that's where a lot of recipe testing comes in. So how do you guys, obviously your mother-in-law does a lot of recipe development with you. How do you guys develop a lot of your recipes from the ground up?
It's inspiration, whenever that lightning strikes, or customers often request. I've been doing a lot of custom batches for people. Either they just want to drink a custom batch at home, or they have a wedding or some event coming up, in 6 months, and they want a mead for it. I'll make those for them. So they'll suggest interesting flavor combinations, and I'll put my own, twist on that, of course, if I think it's a little wild, just to, make sure they get a quality product and they're not paying for something crazy. But we usually start with a 6 or a 20-gallon batch now for a test batch. A lot of my experimental stuff is I'll go through my cabinet and juice selection. I have a bunch of juices, and I'll like, what do I need to use? What do I have left over from other recipes? I created a mead called Tropical Thunderdome that has apple, orange, guava, mango, pineapple. I think that's everything in it, but it was just like all the fruits left over from random batches, and I had a little bit of puree of this and a little bit of this, and I just threw it all together because it was all tropical. And it came out to be a really interesting 16% mead that has it's hard to because there's so many different flavors and it's hard to pin one down and say this is like the primary flavor, but they all seem to mesh decently well. Mm-hmm. I made another one where I had tart cherry juice and I didn't know what to do with all this tart cherry juice. And so I made a tart cherry, ginger, and orange mead. Mm. And that's all this ingredients laying around, and that's a 20-gallon batch. It should be pretty good. And I'm doing a yeast experiment with that. There's a brewery like a block from me, and him and I always talk about yeasts and flavors and stuff. And so I ended up using one of his yeasts for one of my meads from one of my favorite beers that he makes, and just seeing how it'll turn out. So that it'll be interesting. It's a Saison beer yeast. Uh-huh. So I'm interested to see how it turns out.
Yeah. Well, you kind of bring up a good point, talking about all of those tropical flavors. We often make meads and we want to list every single ingredient on there. And when I say balance, I think sometimes people think balancing flavors to where every flavor is equal or equivalent to the other so that you're getting that full experience. And I love that you said you couldn't really pinpoint exactly what was what, but they meshed well together. I think a great example of this is this right here. You're talking about spices in this, and you guys aren't necessarily listing the spices in this. I'm assuming that you're not trying to make the spices a main component. They're just meant to help balance the brew and help to articulate what you're going for with it. Not necessarily say, I want cinnamon or I want whatever other spice to be a predominant flavor. You just want it to be a supporting character. And I think that's important for people to hear and use.
Absolutely. And as far as what you read on a bottle, other than the name, yours is Dark Horse that you're drinking from. The description underneath Dark Horse where it says, honey, prune, date, wine, natural flavors, we don't actually get to pick that descriptor. The label cola, they choose what goes underneath the name as a descriptor, because I would add a lot more information if I was allowed to, but we're not allowed to pick what is put on the label as far as, they pick the wording and the way it says, and we have to put it on there.
That's interesting.
It's kind of annoying, yeah, because I would, want to tell people certain, the Litha label here says honey, black cherry, lemon wine with natural flavors. Doesn't mention lavender at all, even though that's a big component. It's one of the secondary flavors that you taste. The black cherry is up front and the lavender comes in behind. I have another one. I just spaced on it. But, so Freya's Roses, one of our meads, we use a lot of organic rose petals in it. It is rose strong. It is. And we use American saffron in there and a little bit of pomegranate. But on the label, doesn't say rose, doesn't say saffron on there. So we went back and forth with the label people, and finally we changed the name of the mead to Freya's Roses to let people know there was rose petals in it, because they wouldn't let us put the descriptor on the label.
So are they generally, you're taking the product to them, they're tasting it, and then deciding what should be labeled as? How do they decide?
So there's the TTB is the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Bureau, and they approve or deny a recipe before we make it. And then we create a label and send that off to another agency called COLA, and they approve or deny that. And then they send us back, any corrections or, this was approved or this was denied and this is why. And so we make the adjustments. But yeah, when we first started the meadery, we were had all these grand ideas, and like, oh, we're going to do this, this, and this. And then we're going to put this on the label. We're going to do that. And then we got checked real quick.
Wow.
So like there's ingredients like chrysanthemum flowers. They don't want us to use that, even though there's plenty of tea, made with chrysanthemum flowers.
Oh, like you can't actually use it in brewing?
Yeah.
It's not just like you can't list it. That's pretty crazy.
There's some weird little things, and they don't really give you a reason. You know what I mean? Like if I wanted to push the chrysanthemum thing, they would ask me for I would have to send them a printout from the FDA saying that this ingredient is safe to use. So they put all the work on the small business, the brewer, to like hunt all these ingredients, I guess, and make sure they're cool. And it's different person too. So you'll have one. There's 5 different people that approve our recipes, and if you send it to one guy, he'll approve or deny, and then you could send the same thing to another person, and they'll deny it. And so there's no like consistency in the government as far as like approving these recipes or denying the recipes. It's just kind of like this crazy no man's land where we just have to do what they say, because we don't have time to argue with them. I got to brew.
It feels like they should have like a grandmaster list of just approved things, and you're just like, oh, that's on the list. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. But they probably do. But like I said, one person, maybe they were passionate about their job and they're looking up all these little things when I send them a recipe, and maybe the next guy just doesn't give a shit,
Yeah.
And this is like, yeah, whatever. But it's pretty wild how many people are involved in our business, and telling us, what we can and can't do. But we're like I said, we're growing constantly. We're pushing out, and we're thriving despite the little roadblocks.
So are you guys? I don't know for sure on this. Are you guys putting a lot of your stuff out 10% above? Are you investigating lower ABV session style stuff? Where are you at in that world?
When I show you the back, you'll see we don't have a lot of fancy equipment, so session meads aren't really in my ability to make. I do like the one I'm drinking right now is 8%, but that's kind of a mistake. I really love this yeast, W Yeast 4184. It leaves behind residual sweetness, so it's great for making sweet meads. And you're fermenting in lower temp environments, and you don't add yeast nutrients to it, just let it go on its own. Obviously, you should still stir and do all that stuff, aerate, but it'll finish on its own in between 8 to like Dark Horse 11.7. But as soon as you add yeast nutrients and the quantity of honey you need, you can take that same yeast all the way to 17.4. I have another mead where it's strawberries and radishes. Mm-hmm. And local buddy of mine, he's a farmer, and he called me. He's like, I got 100 pounds of radishes. Can you do anything with that? And I was like, sure, why not? So I just tossed them into the strawberry mead I just started and made this strawberry radish concoction. And I fed it, the Tonsa calculator, that method with Fermento, and that same yeast went all the way up to 17.4. And it still tastes great. It's still a semi-sweet mead, but it's strong.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anything that high, it's going to take a while to really mellow out. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to balance that alcohol with anything but time. There's no real fix for that. That's super interesting. I haven't heard of many people brewing with radishes. Obviously, it's possible. I also can't say I've had enough radishes in my life to be like, oh, I know what that tastes like.
It's an earthy strawberry.
Oh.
It's kind of like you picked a strawberry out of the field and maybe it's got a tiny bit of dirt on it. It's kind of that. The Japanese make a straight up radish wine. So when I was doing my research for it, like you said, I couldn't find anyone in America that was brewing with radishes and in the mead or wine. And so I found this like Japanese wine that was made with just radishes. And I was like, well, if they're doing it, it's probably okay. Mm-hmm. And I just rolled the dice, see what happens. It's not a big seller because people see the word radish on the label and they're like, I'm not so sure about that. But it's just turned a year old. I've still got a few cases of it. And
Man, that's interesting. Obviously, that's a good testament that you can kind of brew with anything you want, and you just got to do some research. I think a lot of people, most people who dive into the hobby are willing to do a little bit of research. And even if you find that there's not a lot of conclusive data, it's worth it to like try and see what you can make. One of my series I do on my channel, it's called Can It Be a Mead? And I have these 2 or 3 wheels that I spin, and they basically just say like, oh, we're going to put this and this and this together. And like the first or second episode was watermelon, cinnamon, and jalapeno. I mean, I highly doubt anybody in the universe has ever brewed with those 3 ingredients, but it was interesting. And so somebody's got to do the research. And it could be you. If you're, people listening right now, you could be the person to research that one weird fruit or ingredient for us.
Do it.
All right. So we're going to get to, this is the first time for this podcast. If you're an audio listener listening, via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, you probably need to go find the video version of this, which is on the Man-Made Mead Extras channel. But Daniel's going to give us a little tour of his facility. So what you got for us?
All right. Here we go. So we'll start all the way at the beginning. Sure, don't get run over out here. I'm going to flip the camera around.
Sweet. All right.
So here's the front of the building. And we're a Norse Viking themed meadery. We're open every day at 1. That was one of the things, when COVID hit, everyone shut down and we decided to be open every day instead.
Yeah.
So here's the counter when you come in and the board. And there's our cooler and kegerator. And we got custom made tables and chairs for the meadery.
That's cool. I like that.
We got our display case there. My mother-in-law, we were talking about her at the beginning. She actually painted this. It's a deer skin that she hand painted. But here's the meadery.
Ooh. Man. Yeah, I like your theme. That's cool.
Yeah, let me lock the front door before I forget. Don't want anyone coming in, but let's go to the back where the magic happens. I know that's what everyone really wants to see. So the tasting room is what I'm in right now. Now I'm walking into the back, which is all of this.
Oh.
So we got our sink over there. Got a lot of carboys still left over from the early days. We still use a lot of those.
Uh-huh.
A little bit of a mess in some areas, but you can see we still got all the carboys here. I sold a few to make room for all this stainless steel that we got. So we use Italian wine fermenters. Mm-hmm. They're flat bottom. They're super simple, very thin walled, and they have adjustable lids on the top. And these
That's cool.
Little tiny spouts on the bottom. And then I bought SS Brewtech Bright Tanks. They're 37.5 gallons.
Okay.
And so what I'll do is I'll brew a 45 gallon batch in these guys and rack it down into the bright tank and leave behind, all the sludge and stuff. We don't use brew bags when we brew. So there's a lot of sediment and free floating fruit and all that fun stuff in there. We use local spring water in bottles. Makes it really easy to measure out for a recipe if you know how much water you're using. But these are like this one. This bright tank here has honey bear. This is an experimental mead that I did with gummy bears, and it's got sarsaparilla, juniper berries, ginger root, marshmallow root, vanilla beans, and pounds and pounds of gummy bears.
Oh, interesting.
But it's really tasty, popular. I need to bottle that as soon as I can. But
Did you? Wow, that's interesting.
I just got these tanks in January. They're 500 liters, which is 132 gallons. And I do 120 gallon batches in these guys. And then this is my spice cabinet.
I think people, I just had the realization, you said you're 6'9". I'm like, dude, those look tiny compared to normal, but I forget you're super tall. So you're able to like look into them.
They're pretty big.
Yeah, like that average person. I'm like 6 foot tall. Like that would probably come up to my like chin. Like you're probably.
You can see we got. I borrowed these 2 tanks from the brewery. I mean, you can make mead in anything. These are conicals. Normally, I use the flat bottoms, but he just upgraded all his equipment, and so I picked up some of his old stuff for cheap. You can see all the labels here, and then. Here's all the spices and stuff that we were talking about earlier, you know, hibiscus and ruby rose, and we use actual black tea, you know, cacao nibs, nutmeg that's whole. We had to grind. This is some elderflower that came from a local farm. She gave me that. We use, you know, elderberries. We have a Freya's Magic, which is elderberries, ginger, and lavender. It's another lavender one there. And then, you know, the stock room with all of our cases of stuff.
So how are you, when you bottle, are you bottling wand everything in? Like how are you bottling?
So we're still bottling with bottling wand and, you know, gravity fed. I was going to show you. So the honey comes in these 5-gallon buckets. They're 60 pounds each. And then, you know, we have a keg washer set up here, which is pretty nice. But as far as like, and we use corny kegs right now because commercial kegs require a very expensive washer or you have to drive them to a brewery somewhere. But everything's pretty small here and we do it all in the sink. So everything in here has to be lightweight and able to come and be brought over to the sink for sanitation.
Yeah. So how do you're doing, you said gravity fed bottling. How do you do that from like your, you know, said you're about to bottle the not marshmallow, gummy bear one. Are you moving that up like, or are you using a pump?
Well, that, you know, we'll use a wine pump to rack it with.
Okay.
One of these guys here. I have 2 of these. These are, you know, like $180. You can get them just about any wine website or whatever. They're a low. They don't pump very fast, that's for sure, but it's still a lot faster than gravity. You know, for especially the tall fermenters that I was showing you, the 200 liters, those ones you have to use a pump on. So what we'll do is there's a side port right here on the tank, and we'll just plug the bottling one right into that, and we'll, you know, bottle this until it gets light enough for us to pick it up and put it on top of something like the table that all the carboys are on. We pick it up, put it on that, and finish bottling that way. There's, you know, however we can figure it out right now, because we're still operating, you know, with a lot of homebrew equipment that we started out with. And so it takes a while, but that provides extra jobs for my brother-in-law and a couple of local guys that I pay to come in and help me out on bottling days, which makes it so much faster when there's like 4 people here versus just me. I wanted to show you this guy. So I made goat cheese the other day. And I took the leftover liquid and added a little bit of spring water and honey to it. And I'm seeing what happens. It's a recipe called bland. We'll see what happens.
So it's really funny you mentioned that, because just this past week on my channel, I posted a video of lactomel, as my group has called it, doing that exact same thing, and we used the whey, and then Lahua blossom honey from Hawaii, which is like a really nice fruity honey, and some Hungarian oak, and it did all that stuff, and it turned out really good. But I was very skeptical, I'll put it that way, for a while.
Yeah, I get that. I like trying new things, and for something that weird, I definitely went with just a 1 gallon batch. It's definitely an experimental mead. It'll probably produce, like 3 bottles or something after everything settles out. We are experimenting with filtration here soon. I just got some in the mail today. We had some bottles that were cooking off and blowing corks, and now that we're shipping and stuff like that, I really want to double down on that. In the past, and I've just kept the recipe here in the tasting room. I wouldn't distribute it. I wouldn't sell it to anyone outside of us, because we refrigerate it to keep it stable. And we tell customers, take this home right away and put it back in the fridge, or else it'll blow up on you. And if it does, I'm happy to, replace it for them, because that's my fault, not theirs, that it's, a loaded bottle, so to speak, that gets excited and blows its cork. Thankfully, bottles have actually broken. They've just pushed the cork out. So it's a little messy, but, everyone's safe.
Yeah, I've had that recently, and my big problem was my potassium sorbate I'd used or bought was just, it had been around for a while. I'd had it for a year or two, and I just so happened to use the little baggie that I had for like 2 years, and I'm pretty sure it just over time somehow lost its efficiency, basically. And so do you guys stabilize at all, or do you?
No, we don't use any preservatives or chemicals. We don't add sulfites or potassium sorbate, like you just mentioned. We just rack probably around 6-8 times, try to leave as much as possible behind. Mm-hmm. Normally that works just fine for us. I've only had like the really sweet meads, like this Litha that I'm drinking right now. It had a final gravity of like 1060. And so obviously with that much sugar left behind, once we bottled it and it got, moving in the bottling process, it was like, I want to ferment some more. And so we had to immediately refrigerate the entire batch. But thankfully it wasn't a huge batch, but people love it. Even at that super high sweetness level, I feel like it is sweet. It's almost too sweet, but it's quite nice on a hot day. Bugs want to.
That sweetness, we kind of mentioned it earlier, but I had Kintram, I can't remember what bottle it was, but he does the same thing. Very sweet. I mean, his kind of MO is like he probably finishes his gravity at 1050 on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel that way. And I think that's something that I think new brewers want to be able to do. They want to be able to end super sweet, but they don't always know how to do it in a way that's not just going to be cloying. And we kind of already talked about this, but
yeah,
you guys have, obviously, if you can end something at 1060 and it tastes enjoyable and not extremely sweet and cloying in your face, then you're doing the right things. So
yeah, I would definitely suggest new brewers, if you want a sweet mead, take it to like 1020, 1030 tops and learn to work it from there, or lower, and get your balances. Your alcohol needs to match the sweetness level and the flavors and all that, because if you have super high alcohol content, then it's going to throw off your other flavors. The mead definitely changes flavor. If you have something at 8%, it's like, wow, this is really amazing. And then you brew next time, and it's maybe say a couple degrees warmer in your brew space, and you went all the way to 14% now, and it's going to be a different beverage. It's going to be similar. It's going to be different, definitely.
Yeah.
Like my semi-sweets, I usually always aim for 10-15, just right there in the middle. And I found that's a great spot to be at for my semi-sweets. My dries, I usually take all the way down to 000, or, like 105 or, 1,005, somewhere in there. Because if I would call it dry, then it should be dry. People who want dry meads want dry meads, and they don't want that, or they're on a sugar break, or they're diabetic or whatever, and they still want a little taste of something nice, but they don't want to like break their sugar bank.
Right. Well, and according to the BJCP, the dry category is like 990 to like 1010. So technically, there's, if we're going by those standards, you could go up to 1010 and still be dry.
It's definitely it's a perceived sweetness. When you start getting up 1010 or higher, it's still a really good balance and a nice beverage, but it's definitely, I feel like, as far as like perceived sweetness goes, it's not super dry anymore, and you start to lose dry characteristics when you start creeping up towards the end of that dry range where you're at 1010. So I try to stay lower than that, but I'd say most of my brews come in around 12 to 18%. I've got quite a few 14 to 16%ers. That's usually where they like to finish at, and it's hard, with all that super basic equipment. A lot of times I'm playing with the air conditioner remote to keep the environment right where it's supposed to be. Like if I need to finish less, or turn off the air conditioner if I want it to finish more. But it's most, I would say none of our fermentations ever go above like 74 degrees, even during brewing, because we use small fermenters and they're thin walled, so they really release the heat quite quickly.
Yeah, and that's a pro of stainless. I'd love to be able to do that someday. I'm currently my little zone is pretty small. I can almost touch my walls right now, so I don't know that there's any opportunity for me to get any real stainless stuff for a while. But that is a pro, and I think earlier you kind of mentioned yeast and talking about how you'd mentioned, I can't remember which yeast it was, but you talked about how given circumstance A, it will go from here to here, and B, it'll go from here to here. And
that's all yeasts do that. It's just how you want to play it, with temperature, with nutrients, because you can scroll all the way down to the Tonsa calculator and select high nutrient requirements, and just ignore the rest, the yeast recommendations, and just blow it out of the water if you want, with a bunch of nitrogen, and the yeast will just take off and do their own thing. Those suggestions on the packets are really just suggestions. But if my sweet meads that I want to leave sweet on purpose, that are, somewhere in the 1040 to 1060 range, like I was talking about, those ones I won't feed nutrients to, and they'll just finish on their own and be like, all right, I'm happy at like 12%, 11%, and just kind of die off.
Do you notice any off character? That's the only thing I worry about sometimes with yeast is not given the right things, are they going to produce any off characters? Have you ever noticed anything?
71B definitely will. From the Lavalin family, I really like the Lavalin family. I stopped using 71B, probably like 6 months ago or more, just because I did not like that leftover flavor. esters, I guess, the yeasty ester flavor, and I wasn't happy with that. So the W Yeast company makes good yeast, and their 4184 yeast, like I mentioned before, is specifically designed to finish and leave behind residual sugar. So that yeast has never done me wrong as far as flavors go. It's always been great, especially for melomels. It's leaves behind. It's like a fruity yeast.
Yeah. Is it a wine yeast?
It's a sweet mead cider yeast, actually.
Okay. So it just is breeded to attenuate lower then.
Yeah. It's not on the tons calculator, but if you're going to feed it, I would go with like medium requirements at the bottom. Unless, of course, you wanted to make a really high alcohol, like the Skog brand that I mentioned, the strawberry radish. That one was that same sweet mead cider yeast, but I just overclocked the nutrient addition, and it went all the way up to 17.4.
Oh, wow.
Down in the 8 to 12% range. So it's really, you got to play with some yeast a couple of times and see what happens and see how you like it. I still use a lot of RC212 and K1B 1116. The RC212 I love for berries, red berries like cherry especially. It really brings forward a nice bright cherry flavor. Where if you were to use, say, like 71B, that would really mute that cherry flavor and give you I don't know, like when I think of cherries, I always think of a bright flavor, something that really stands out. And I was really disappointed with some of my yeast trials before I came across RC212 for cherry. And then the K1B I love for dry meads. That's also I use for a couple of our semi-sweets, but I end up having to back sweeten those because it does take it all the way to like 16% and up most of the sugar.
Yeah, so in a lot of those wine yeast, especially the ones that you're talking about, the K1B1, 71B, they're kind of created, especially in the mead world, to just consume. I mean, their goal is consume the sugar, get all the way through it. And obviously we're getting into the realm where people are wanting to do more sweet mead yeast, and so they're, whatever the scientific process is of being able to now attenuate to a lower amount, which is nice. But I was going to mention, if people are interested in any yeast information, a great thing to do, it sounds really silly, but Google the yeast and go to the main company. Lalvin does a fantastic job. They have a spec sheet that you scroll down and you click the spec sheet, and it literally has a graph that tells you, here's what the yeast produces. It's esters, it's tropical flavors or lack of. It tells you the temperature range, attenuation, nutrient needs. Like, you can find out every piece of information about your yeast. You just have to Google it. And I want to make sure people know that, because I think sometimes people go, I don't know if I want to use this. Well, look it up. See,
yeah, so many kinds of yeasts out there, and you don't have to use. Now they're coming out with a lot of mead yeast because mead is so popular now. But you don't have to use that. You could use beer yeast. You could use wine yeast. You could use cider yeast. It really, like, read the description about the yeast and what it imparts to the beverage, and then make your choice based off that, not based off what it's originally designed for. Because mead is this great area where you can kind of do whatever you want, and most of the time it works out really well.
Yeah, well, I've had a couple that did not work out very well, but you're right. Most of the time it turns out pretty good.
Yeah. When in doubt, just age it out. Just wait a year. It might be a lot better then.
Yeah, on the topic of yeast, I have I used to do these. I still do them some, but I call them a yeast shootout, and it's basically a single traditional mead recipe, 2 different yeast, let them ferment, and then decide which one did it better. And so I'm about to do a ginormous version of that with 20 different yeast and have them all ferment at the same time. It's going to be a pain, but I'm hoping it's research towards the future for us. So,
that's
and
awesome.
well, Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for giving us a tour. I like I said earlier, if you are just listening, you missed out on the tour. Go come back and find the video on the Man-Made Mead Extras channel. But how can we support you? Where can we find you? How can we get in touch?
We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We have a website. We now ship to 38 states, 39, including North Carolina. We're constantly posting and doing stuff. Like we had a festival on Saturday and we made mead popsicles for those. And we got a bunch of leftovers. So now we're just selling those in the tasting room. But that's, another experiment. We'd never made them before up until the day before this festival, and just did a 50-50 blend of mead and fruit juice, and it froze pretty well. A lot better than for a 12% mead, but it worked out nicely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Maybe my first thought was like, you almost got some like Applejack, but mead jack with those.
A dry traditional mead and added black cherry juice and blackberry syrup to it, and whipped it all together, and then filled so many popsicle sleeves. But it's worth it. We love doing new stuff all the time. I would say is going back to like flavors and that kind of thing. If you can get the Flavor Bible, if you're familiar with that book.
Got it right up behind me, right over here.
My desk in the back too. That thing is amazing. As far as like quick reference, when you start Googling things, you can get lost down some trails of home brewers talking about stuff. And it's nice to just have a book that you can just look things up real quick and be like, oh yeah, well that pairs well with this, or not so well, but I'll give it a shot anyways. I always the home brewers in my area, just do what you want, grow some stuff in your backyard, make a mead out of it, just have fun with it.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, we want to make, you want to make a mead that's good. And I think what's important is you make mead that's good for yourself, because you're the one who's probably going to drink a lot of the mead unless you're just fortunate enough to be able to get it out there. But as you're making mead, kind of surround yourself with people who are honest enough to give you feedback and say it's good or this is bad. I think that's important too, that you got friends who will tell you this is not so good, because sometimes we only listen to the people who give us positive things in life, and we need to hear the negatives every once in a while. But get some good friends around you and just start making more mead and be experimental.
Yeah. When we first started Meadery, like I said, it took 2 years to get to opening day. We were home brewing, of course, test recipes before that, and we'd take them to barbecues, and family and whoever would want to taste it. Like this, tell me what you think. And it's always been really well received. And if people don't like something, they know that I'm open to receiving that criticism, being like, I really love this, or this is not so great. And I think you could do this or that. Like you said, add oak to Dark Horse. So I'll fool around with that later. See what happens. Because we're still testing stuff. Even with our tried and true recipes, we won Best in Show and Gold for Dark Horse in a North Carolina competition. That doesn't mean you can't make it better. Like you could always make something better.
Yeah. I said something controversial one time. Well, I say controversial. I said Ken Schramm has not made his best mead yet. And, I feel like a lot of people are like, gasp, like, of course he has, he's like the god of mead making. Like he can't make, I think the truth is even Ken Schramm himself, everyone knows, is still learning how to make mead better every day. And that is inspiration for me to keep going too, because if he can learn something, I can learn something.
For 3 years now. Oh, I forgot to show you something in the back. Still got time. So I've been keeping a label from every batch that we've brewed and sold commercially.
Oh, that's sweet.
So we're at, I think there's like close to 50 labels on this fridge. And
That's awesome.
Include some that, haven't had labels made for them yet. Or, this one, the Salt Cave, I made for another business. And it is, I use smoked bourbon sea salt with caramel and apple. So the salt provides a really interesting sour note to it. And you can kind of tell it's salt, but with the apple and the caramel flavor, it really balances nicely. So that was my first time using a salt in a mead, and it turned out pretty well, thankfully.
Yeah.
Especially when someone else is like, I need this by a certain time. You're like, okay, so no test batch. I'm just doing this.
Just going for it.
Yeah.
That's kind of going to the goes style, where they're using salt in that. I think it's a beer style. I don't remember what it is.
Other people are playing with salt. It's a really interesting flavor component that probably most people never about ever using in a beverage, like in the actual beverage itself. But that one came out 9%. So it's a nice little sweet mead that they're real happy with.
Yeah. I think that's I feel like that's also a commercial trick too, in that a lot of big places will use more salt in their stuff to make you more thirsty. I'm sure that people sneaks a little salt in too to help with that, because makes your mouth like, oh, I need to keep drinking. Man, I just gotta if you do it right.
A local smokehouse that makes a snack mix for us. And it got that smoky, salt, tiny bit of heat to it too. So it definitely wants, you definitely want to keep sipping while you're snacking on that.
Yeah. I can see that. I kind of want to experiment that whole combination. Has my brain moving now.
Run with it. Do something cool. Let me know.
Yeah, I will. Hey, well, thank you for your time, Daniel. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm going to put down in the description of this video and of the podcast, if you're listening, audio only, of course, there's that description will have all the links I can find for the meadery. And I hope that you guys will check out Moonjoy, because, I mean, just based off of the flavor combinations you talked about today, I'm feeling inspired. And it sounds like with how many places you're shipping to, more than likely people are going to be able to get a hold of your stuff. So
yeah. We've got the Dark Horse on there, Bjorn Bear, which is my year-round blackberry. That one's, a super simple recipe. It says local blackberry, spring water, honey, a touch of lemon juice in there for a little balance. I might play with some oak on that next time around. Feel like it's not quite there. It's just missing something. It's a good recipe, but I feel like I could do better.
Yeah.
But always, the nature of the beast when you're creating things, and you're like, I could probably do better next time.
That's what keeps artists going. I think we're mead artists in our own way. And so I think that is what drives us to continue to make better and better stuff, to always have something that, we never arrive. It's kind of a weird world to never really arrive where you want to be, but you also feel inspired. That's like where I'm at every day.
Yep.
Man. Well, like I said, I'll put all the links in the description. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the tour. I honestly really enjoyed getting to see that, and I hope that people will go and watch the video portion to see it, because it's a lot of fun. But you have a really cool space, and I sure hope I can send people your way.
I appreciate it. It was fun talking to you. I always love talking to other brewers, just because we have different ideas and we bounce off each other. And I'm glad that you're now inspired, and there's so much more to do, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I hope we get to chat again soon, but until then, cheers.
Cheers.